When I woke up this morning, my whole body was aching. I felt sharp pangs of pain in my body. As soon as I opened my eyes, the events of the night before started replaying in my mind. And as soon as I remembered everything, I trembled with fear and agony. Last night, my brother's beautiful face suddenly transformed into that of a beast, and the way he was tormenting me, I was becoming helpless with the intensity of the pain. I was terrified just looking at him, especially when he threatened, "Don't let your mother find out. If you tell her, I'll treat you even worse." Hearing this, I was forced to think about why I couldn't tell my mother. I started realizing in my heart that this was all wrong. That's why Rehan Pai had specifically told me not to tell my mother. Now, when I came into the kitchen for breakfast, my mother was startled seeing my condition. She placed her hand on my forehead and said, "You have a very high fever, and why are you becoming so sluggish? What happened to you?" At the touch of her sympathy, tears burst from my eyes, and I cried uncontrollably. Seeing me like this, my mother became worried. She held my face in her hands and said, "Tell me what happened. Why are you crying so much?" "Until you tell me, how will I know? Stop crying and tell me the reason. I'm worried. You know I have high blood pressure and I get anxious over small things. Don't disturb me." Just then, Rehan Bhai also entered the kitchen. He gave me a stern look and then said to my mother, "Mom, please make me some hot parathas. I'll talk to Gudia, me." He placed his hand on my head and, glaring at me in anger, said, "What's the matter? Why are you crying?" My mother had her back turned to us, busy rolling out the parathas. I barely managed to swallow the lump in my throat and said, "I have a fever, and I don't feel like going to school today. That's why I'm crying. My mother doesn't allow me to take a day off, and today I really don't want to go to school." This timely excuse worked, and my mother smiled and said, "I'm not a cruel mother who would send you to school while you're sick. If you're not feeling well, you can take the day off." She continued, "I'll take you to the doctor myself so you can get better quickly. Your ninth grade exams are coming up. Your teachers have said that you've become very lazy with your studies. If this continues and your grades drop, it will be hard for you to get admission anywhere. You know how badly I want to make you educated and capable." She continued, "These three boys didn't listen to me. They avoided studying. Now we have placed all our hopes in you, so won't you live up to my expectations?" I nodded in agreement, and then the other two brothers came in for breakfast. Afterward, they all left for work, and my mother told me, "Today I have to attend a funeral. I will try to return by evening, so I'm taking you to the doctor now because after I leave, you'll have to look after the house. If you're still unwell, how will you manage?" Listening to her, I became anxious and said, "Please come back home before evening. Without you, I will be scared when I'm alone." My mother laughed and then said, "Your three brothers and your father are also at home. With their presence, you have no reason to be scared." But when I started insisting, my mother agreed and said, "Okay, I will try to come home early." True to her promise, my mother came home in the evening, and seeing that, I let out a sigh of relief. I really wanted to sleep with her tonight, so I insisted and kept her with me. My mother also laid down with me on the bed. It was midnight when I woke up with a strange feeling. I began to feel the same painful sensation I had felt yesterday. I felt ants crawling all over my body. Suddenly, the intensity of the pain made me open my eyes, and once again, the horrifying truth was in front of me. I couldn't escape from it, no matter how hard I tried. Gradually, all my resistance faded away. My tears soaked into the pillow, and I became still, sobbing quietly. This started happening every other day. I no longer had the strength to get up and walk from one place to another. My mother took me to the doctor. He glanced at me casually and gave me some medicine, saying, "Girls of this age don't take care of their diet. They are always focused on studies, and that's why their health deteriorates. You should take special care of her diet, and she will get better." But what did the doctor know about the torment I was going through? I couldn't tell my mother either. Rehan Bahai used to threaten me, saying that he would drop me in a dark forest where black snakes and cobras would be, and there would be many wolves who would tear me apart and devour me. I was only a 14-year-old girl, but the way he spoke scared me, and unwillingly, I was forced to keep quiet. I had been taking many days off from school, which made my mother very worried about how much it was affecting my studies. One day, Rehan Pai was in my room when suddenly there was a knock at the door. When I looked, Zain Pai was standing there. He was looking inside in disbelief. He angrily said to Rehan Pai, "I've been noticing for days that you leave the room at night. I often wondered where you go, but I never paid attention because I was always asleep. Today, if I hadn't been awake, I would never have found out that you've been having fun alone. I'm really angry with you. Why didn't you include me?" Then the two of them began to torment me. I watched them in disbelief, thinking about what kind of brothers they were, and the pain kept increasing. Now the two of them were torturing me together. I felt like I was walking on a thin line, living in constant agony. My mother kept getting worried when she saw my condition. She would ask, "What's wrong? Why have you stopped eating? Why have you become so weak? Why are you always worried and crying? Why don't you tell me what your problem is?" Then I grabbed my mother's hand and said, "I'm scared of sleeping alone. Please sleep with me. Once I get enough rest, I'll be fine." I begged my mother in such a way that she was left shocked. She promised me that she would no longer let me sleep alone. Today, my mother lay down with me again, but when I opened my eyes, she was nowhere to be seen. Instead, there were 3 shadows in front of me, not shadows, but 3 ghosts who were ready to devour me. I started crying uncontrollably when I saw them. It felt as though life was leaving my body, and I felt like I might not even take another breath. It seemed like this torment would drive me mad. Before they could approach me and introduce me to further pain and suffering, there was a flash of light in the room, and the entire room was bathed in light. The whole scene became clear, and the darkness faded away. And in that light, there was a horrifying sight. Someone who couldn't bear the horrifying sight. And then, in the next moment, when I was little, my grandmother used to show a lot of love to my 3 brothers, but for some reason, she always turned her face away from me. I, on the other hand, took great care of her and felt happy doing her small chores with my own hands. I wished that my grandmother would show me the same love she showed my brothers, but for some reason, she always turned away from me and mumbled, "I don't know why my son and daughter-in-law have taken this burden upon themselves. What's the need for this child?" I would wonder in surprise, why does grandmother say such things about me? I am her blood too. Then why such hatred and indifference towards me? When I asked my parents this question, they would look at each other. My mother would say softly to my father, "Why don't you explain to Amma, grandmother? Why does she say these things in front of the children? It affects their hearts, and if we've done a good deed, why is she making it a burden on us? Why is she ruining our good deed?" She would continue, "She needs to open her heart. After all, this little girl won't harm us. Please talk to Amma." I would get confused listening to their words, but I never understood what they meant. My 3 brothers didn't love me either, and they would scold me angrily when they saw me, even though I tried to take care of everyone. I wished my brothers would play with me, like my friends' brothers would play with them. Their brothers would even take them to the store and buy them things. But for some reason, my brothers never took care of me or brought me anything. Once, Rehan Pai took me to the store, but then he met his friend on the way and got busy talking to him. When we got home late in the evening, my parents were pacing around the courtyard in worry. As soon as my brother came in, my mother started slapping him and asked, "Where did you take her? Tell me what you did with her." Rehan Pai looked at my mother in surprise, then went to his room without saying anything. My mother, in tears, asked me, "Where did he take you?" I hesitated, but then nervously told her. He took me to the store to buy something for me, but on the way, he met his friend and started talking to him. Grandmother was very angry as well. She started scolding me, saying, "Today I had to raise my hand on my son for you. I don't know whose child this is, whom you have taken and held close to your chest. This child doesn't even know whether it is a legitimate child or an illegitimate one. Maybe someone has stained their hands and thrown it away, and you picked up someone else's filth and brought it into your house. You've seated it on the same level as your own children. Tomorrow, you will give it a share from the inheritance and even place your son's rights into its lap." My mother lifted me and took me to the room and said to my father, "Explain to her, don't say such things." Days continued to pass, and then, one day, my grandmother's health deteriorated greatly. Everyone was very worried, and they took her to the hospital. My mother was praying for her while crying, and suddenly, guests started gathering in the house. It was then that I found out my grandmother had passed away and gone to Allah's mercy. After that, people continued to visit the house for many days. I used to go to her room to search for her, but then my mother told me that my grandmother would never come back. Gradually, I began to forget this, and then my three brothers' behavior toward me started changing compared to before. Now, Rehan Bhai showed me a lot of affection, and he would bring me plenty of chocolates and other things. But the way he showed affection was very strange to me. He loved me in a way that was very different from how my father and mother showed love, and this made me feel very uncomfortable. When he would take me to the room, I couldn't stay there, and I would run away. I wanted to tell my mother everything, but I didn't know how to explain it to her. It felt very strange to me, and I was afraid that everyone might start misunderstanding me. If my mother scolded me and said, "All brothers are like this, and they love their sisters in this way," I would stay quiet. But deep down, something didn't feel right. Then their wrong behavior toward me, causing me pain and torment. I couldn't bear it anymore. But now, with all three of them in my room, I was terrified. I felt like death was coming closer. When I opened my eyes and looked, my mother had collapsed to the ground with a thud. At that moment, all three of them rushed to my mother, and a wave of fear and terror swept through the entire house. My mother had fainted, and no matter what, she couldn't regain consciousness. Slowly and cautiously, they woke up my father. He, too, was surprised to see everyone gathered in my room and wondered what was going on. Then they took my mother to the hospital. I was alone at home, and I was very scared. I locked the door of the room from the inside, and after a while, a woman from the neighborhood came to stay with me. She was a distant relative, and my father had asked her to stay with me. I kept thinking about my mother and what had happened to her. Was she okay? The next day, my father told me that my mother had suffered a heart attack but was now out of danger. I could go see her. When I went to the hospital with my father, my mother burst into tears as soon as she saw me. I ran to her and hugged her. Then she whispered in my ear, "You went through such a great ordeal and you didn't tell me about it. You suffered alone." My father was standing nearby, unaware of all this, and was looking at us with surprise, wondering what we were talking about. Then my mother told my father, "I'll explain everything to you when we get home." After that, my mother gave a furious look to all three of my brothers. She was not talking to them. The next day, when my mother was discharged and came home, she looked very weak. Women from the neighborhood and female relatives came to visit her. My father had arranged for a maid as well because taking care of so many guests and arranging tea and snacks for them was too difficult for me to handle alone. At night, when everyone started to lay down to sleep, my mother pulled me close to her, and my father was even surprised that my mother wouldn't leave me alone for a single moment. For many days, guests kept coming to the house. There were many guests who stayed the night as well, so we didn't have the chance to talk amongst ourselves. The three brothers were hiding in corners, and they never came in front of me or my mother after returning home. My father couldn't understand what was going on. After a few days, when the guests stopped coming and my mother's health had improved, my father said, "Finally, tell me the truth about all this. What kind of riddle is this? What game are you all playing? You're going to make me go crazy. What is going on? Can someone tell me?" Then my mother, while crying, told my father everything. She then said to me, "Why didn't you tell us all this? How long has this been happening to you?" I was ashamed to talk about it in front of my father, but I told my mother everything, that Rehan Bhai had started this behavior a long time ago. My father looked at me in disbelief. Then my father called all three of my brothers into the room and asked them about it. They lowered their heads in shame. My father was very angry with them, and he was so furious that he felt like shooting them. Then my mother made a revelation to me, and I was left stunned. My mother said, "Actually, you are not our biological daughter. You are our adopted daughter." I was shocked. For all these years, my parents never made me feel that I wasn't their daughter. It was a day during the winter season when everyone was huddled under warm blankets in their homes. Your father was going to the mosque for Fajr prayers when he heard the cry of a small child from the street. He was surprised to see who would throw such a small child outside at this hour. When he looked carefully, he saw a tiny form wrapped in a blanket outside the mosque. He immediately picked it up and brought it home. "This is how you came into our house. My mother-in-law objected to keeping someone else's child in our house, but how could we be away from you? You were such an innocent and lovely child. We didn't know anything about your parents, why they threw you out in such cold weather. How could they separate a little angel from themselves? Maybe they had some compulsion that prevented them from raising you, but it had always been my wish for Allah to bless me with a daughter. Due to some complications, the doctor had told me clearly that after 3 children, I would never be able to become a mother again. And then, seeing you, my long-standing wish was awakened again. When I saw you, I felt that you came into this world to fulfill my wish. I never wanted to tell you this truth, but now the situation has become such that I have to tell you everything, and now I feel ashamed of myself because I did everything to raise and nurture you, but I couldn't protect you. I had forgotten that my three sons are non-mahram, strangers to you. The truth is, their late grandmother hated you. She never liked you and never considered you as a daughter. That's why your grandmother planted this thought in your brothers' minds that you are not their real sister, although your father and I tried very hard to make you feel like a true sibling. But what your grandmother whispered in your brother's ears at a young age showed its effects. I never thought that I needed to protect you from them. They knew it, but you were unaware. I don't know why I couldn't understand your fear. I should have told you from the start to be cautious around them, but I made the mistake of keeping you unaware of all this. However, it's not too late. Remember, they are your brothers, but they are not your real brothers. I am at fault because I took on the responsibility of raising you, but I didn't do it properly. I didn't want you to know that you're not our biological child because you were already troubled by your grandmother's behavior. We didn't want you to feel inferior. Allah is my witness. We loved you more than our own children. My mother's face was wet with tears. I was also very saddened to learn this truth. Then my mother hid me under her wings. She would take me to school and bring me back, and at night I would sleep beside her. She never let me out of her sight for even a moment, but even with that, the horrifying nights still torment me. I don't think I will ever be able to forget the pain I endured. Whenever I saw the faces of those three, I was reminded of the torment I had suffered. They had apologized to me and they were ashamed, but I couldn't clear my heart of the anger I felt toward them. As my suffering increased, my parents sent me to a hostel. There I started studying with full focus, and now I would only come home during the holidays. Temporarily, at least, I managed to escape from those memories.